Just looking at A, any substance or combination of substances presented as having properties for treating or preventing disease in human beings. Now, I had a law degree, but I can't pretend to be a lawyer or to be enough in touch. But it's very hard to get away from that, I think, as a medicine. And yet, I've had a lot of correspondence with the MHRA, as they are now, the Medicines Control Agency, as they used to be, who have given me any number of answers as to why they don't believe they should look at it and call it a medicine. And those are some of them. And they're so different from each other, some of them, over the time, that I had to wonder whether they were making it up, but perhaps they have their good reasons. I think there are lots of legal bits about whether you technically administer it to somebody according to the wording and so on. But it's quite clear that they're fighting, like anything, not to make it a medicine. And they may be right, they may be legitimate, or they may not. There. One thing we know sort of semi-officially is that people like the Nuffield Council on Bioethics, who did a report 3 years ago into a number of public health things, including fluoridation, took their cue. They took their cue from the MHRA, and they said, if I can read this, the MHRA has indicated that fluoridation of water is not within its remit. Quote, as drinking water is quite clearly a normal part of the diet, the MHRA does not regard it to be a medicinal product. They also rule out food supplementation or fortification under the technicalities of those regulations and rules. But as drinking water is quite clearly a normal part of the diet, well, I wonder about that. I mean, drinking water is a food, but how far do you have to go adding things to it before it shades over into, say, a medicine? To my way of thinking, it's intended to do what those European words say, presented for treating or preventing disease there. And I think the MHRA deserves a challenge on this. The problem is lack of funds and lack of willingness for anyone to put their head over the parapet, risk losing an awful lot of money and take it to court on that basis. So it's my personal view the MHRA is wrong. I could very well be wrong myself. But I think there's an argument still to be had on this, on the medicinal one. Nuffield took the MHRA's view that it was a food, and and left it at that in their report. And that's the way that the department responds if you challenge them on that, that even with topped up, as they like to call it, fluoride, it is a food. 4 minutes, thanks very much, yes. So natural and occurring fluoride, I haven't time to go into the one very weak study which tried to determine if the effects of natural and artificial are similar or not. There was some funny business there. Poison almost certainly yes. Food yes, according to the authorities. Medicine, question mark. Makes medicinal claims, and in my understanding it treats you. Just time to look at ethics and the social science. Ethics, as I say, to me this is a matter of ordinary medical ethics, and I think people easily get distracted by those peculiarities of fluoride. The fact that it's not actually delivered by a doctor in the surgery, it's at arm's length, it's done by somebody in the water company, so doctors and dentists don't have to deal with angry patients, for example. But I think I'd rather just look at Scientific Knowledge and Controversy, a very interesting book by a social scientist, in which he argues very strongly that you cannot tell the science of fluoridation and many other things unless you actually look at the social science. The kind of things, what he says at one point is, this point again illustrates the impossibility of assessing the fluoridation issue without a full consideration of the dimension of power. An assessment of the scientific evidence is incomplete without knowledge of what research may have been inhibited from being done, prevented from being published, or relegated to marginal status by attacks on the credibility of the researchers. And through his book he says you've got to look at the societal effects there and of values. Is it more important individual autonomy or protecting children's teeth and so on? So there's a wide debate to be had there, and people think narrow scientific issue, but no, it can't be that. Just to read through some conclusions that came to me at the end of this, we simply not had a full debate on this. If it's a medicine, it would fail the test of the MHRA. The York scientists were quite clear on that. Although the evidence is surprisingly weak, still the government and health professionals under the present law have power to impose it undemocratically, and are using that power down in Southampton. There seems to be no drive to improve the evidence, whatever York said, and I think if you were in a position of power and wanted to fluoridate people, why would you need any more evidence? Passion and bias remain endemic on both sides. I believe it has unique features, but I'm happy to be challenged on that as a healthcare intervention, those ones that I put up earlier. And as I said at the end, it's about values just as much as it is about the scientific evidence. Thank you.
Worthwhile mentioning that as a medic, I was a default fluoridationist. I had assumed that the evidence was good. And it wasn't until I was given a paper written by a New Zealand dentist, a paper given to me, it was published in Perspectives in Biology and Medicine. Cahoon is his name. And he had actually helped to introduce fluoridation in New Zealand, but then basically decided that he'd made a mistake. So in essence, he was recanting. I thought that, if there was a professional who had actually been behind this and then actually had changed their mind, that meant that there was something worthwhile looking into here. So there are two bits of information which I think may be relevant to the discussion. One is that because this intervention is meant to be targeting and reducing caries, we know with very strong evidence that fluoridated toothpaste does prevent and reduce caries. We also know that if you look at a population level, there's been a really dramatic decline in caries in all of the countries where it's been measured over the last 30 years, regardless of whether they've used fluoridation or not. And then the other factor that needs to be taken into account is that the only survey of which I'm aware of both professionals and the public shows that 95% of the public are against water fluoridation, 95% of the professionals are pro-fluoridation. There's a completely bimodal distribution of views on it, depending on whether you're a professional or an average member of the public.
That was high, the Scottish one, for people, not as many anti of the people in most other surveys.
Is that right?
Yeah, not quite as high as that.
So,